The Mill Owner's Daughter.
Chapter 10. Come on, Michael, it's your big day today. Irene Rose ruffled her husband's thick black hair. The clock had just struck 6. The Irishman rolled over, grasping his wife's hand as he did so. Come back to bed, Rose. She laughed. No, you have to get up. It's the Trades Delegate Conference today. You need to be wide awake. You're wanted at the Sherwood. He looked up at her with his dark blue eyes, placing his strong arms around her waist. I'll be down in a few moments, Rose. Will you be accompanying me? Try and keep me away, Michael O'Donnell. She kissed him on the forehead and broke away from him, a smile on her face. I'll pour the tea for you. The porridge awaits. As conference organiser, Michael felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, hoping both he and the conference would match up to their obligations adequately. Irene Rose, on the other hand, seemed supremely confident, as though automatically assuming things would turn out for the best. The Irishman smiled. Irene Rose was only being her natural self after all. She always seemed unflappable in the most stressful situations, a rock of certainty in an uncertain world. Michael climbed out of bed, girding himself for battle. I'm afraid the pub has been booked for a private function today, ma'am. You're not allowed in. Michael O'Donnell smiled to himself, wondering how Irene Rose would react to this snub. At that point, the ginger-headed, freckled face of Albert Ashton appeared through the door from the conference room. Good morning, Miss Rose, he grinned, greeting her like a long-lost friend. Aren't they a delegate from Cottonmeisters today? Have they had a change of heart? Irene Rose laughed, shaking her head. No, Albert, not today. I'd like to attend as a visitor. The operative sat at the table checking delegates' bona fides and issuing credentials appeared to be nonplussed. Albert sized up the situation at a glance. Allow Miss Rose entry out, Kevin. She can bring 500 Millans into action with no more than a dozen words. Lassie's one of us. Kevin decided he'd make Irene Rose a visitor from the press and issued her with an appropriate pass. He nodded to Michael, stood next in the queue, recognising the conference organiser, who grinned back at him. Albert guided Irene Rose to a seat at the back of the room beneath a window. That could have been a tricky situation, Kevin. You handled it well. Dost thou know the lass, Michael? Aye, lad, slightly, the Irishman replied, pan-faced. We share a bed most nights. Irene Rose is me wife. Kevin blushed. I'm sorry. Don't worry, Kevin. Me spouse won't be upset. Just keep your eye on her once the conference gets underway. She'll be up on her feet to give us all a lecture if we're not careful. Matthew Etherow, Daniel Ackroyd and young Daniel sat by the wall looking out onto the Rochdale Canal, enjoying the mid-August sunshine. Matthew put down the copy of his Times as Mary Upton approached, complete with tray, on which balanced a teapot, milk jug, sugar and crockery. There we are, she grinned, placing the tray on the table. Milk for thee, Daniel, she said, passing the youngster his special cup. Come and join us, Mary. You look as though you need a break. She looked at the mill owner and smiled, swiping a stray lock of hair back off her forehead. You're right, Matthew, I could do with resting me legs for a minute. Mary noticed the headline, Riotous Shot, and picked up the newspaper. What on earth's the world coming to? She asked, studying the report with much tut-tutting. There you all are. Matthew looked up as his daughter walked across the yard. He hadn't expected to see her so early. Irene Rose, he said, standing and pulling a chair out for her. There's not trouble, is there? Irene Rose sat down and smiled at young Daniel. The lad was already on his feet, ready to take his place. No, everything's fine, father. Come on, Daniel. How's my favourite little man? Are you having a good day? She asked. Her arm snaked around the lad as he clambered onto her knee. I am, Auntie Rose. I've been feeding the ducks with Uncle Matthew. The conference is off to a good start, Irene Rose informed them. Over 140 delegates turned up. They've had to abandon the Sherwood and move to the Carpenter's Hall. Michael was only expecting 80 or so. Have they decided anything yet? Give them chance, father. They spent most of the morning sorting out credentials. They had to ensure the delegates were elected and weren't just representing themselves. Then they elected Alexander Hutchinson as chairman and Charles Stewart as secretary. The real business starts this afternoon." She looked into her father's eyes and smiled once more. "Don't worry, I'm returning to the conference after you've treated me to one of Mary's delicious stews. I'll provide you with a blow-by-blow account later on." She turned her attention back to young Daniel. "Let's go for a walk along the canal. You can show me whatever there is to see before we all eat." Daniel slipped off her knee in a flash and held his hand out for her, a big grin splitting his little face. He'd found a dead rat earlier and wanted to show her. Whilst the delegate conference carried on with its business in Manchester, events in the wool textile districts of the West Riding were not standing still. The day before in Leeds, the normal day of rest, for it was a Sunday, Prince George of Cambridge came to the town. He was soon joined by Lord Cardigan, the Earl of Harewood, and William Beckett MP, the Colonel of the Yorkshire Hussars. These notables had command of cavalry, hussars and lancers. All were duly paraded through the streets and parks of the town, a riot of colour, a stamping of hoofs, and an impressive expression of military force. If they'd been present to entertain the populace, they'd no doubt have been welcomed. Unfortunately, the populace realised they were there to put them in their place. A swearing-in ceremony took place the next day, at which 1,500 special constables enrolled. Special constables and troops were also in action at Halifax. That morning, thousands of men and women marched in peaceful procession from Bradford, where all the mills had already ceased work. Below Newbank, not far from Berry's foundry on the outskirts of Halifax, they were met by magistrates and a force of soldiers with fixed bayonets and drawn swords, accompanied by hundreds of specials. They read the Riot Act and forbade the marchers to enter the town. The main body of marchers then dispersed in orderly fashion onto Skircote Moor, although a few hotheads kept to lower ground in order to wait in ambush for the troops, unable to resist the chance to throw stones at them. On the moor, a mass meeting was already underway. Earlier that day, Halifax workers had visited Ackroyd's mill, where they'd been met by a troop of soldiers. In the ensuing fracas, 18 of their comrades had been arrested and sent to appear before the magistrates. They'd ruled the men should be imprisoned and sent to Wakefield the next day for trial. Not surprisingly, this had caused great excitement in the town. According to eyewitnesses, the moor was literally covered with men and women. The meeting reflected the hardening of workers' attitudes, whose passions, excited over previous months by wage cut after wage cut, had been fanned further by the deployment of troops. Decisions were taken to continue and spread the strikes, and to mount an expedition to free the prisoners. Once more demands were made for the Charter to be made the law of the land, although Chartists had been noticeable for their absence on the moor that day. "Excuse me, can you tell me where I may find Mr. Edrow? I'm told he owns Gibraltar Mill." A young dark-haired woman with 2 children, both boys, one about 5 and the other younger, stood before the counter in Mary's kitchen. Anna Sutcliffe guessed she hailed from Glasgow, judging by her accent. The youngster smiled and lifted the counter flap. "Yes, Matthew's sat over there." She indicated the table near the wall by the canal. "I'll take you. Me name's Anna. What's yours?" "Mrs. Morrison, Janet Morrison." Anna took her by the arm and they walked into the yard. "Mr. Edrow, this is Janet Morrison. She needs to talk to you." "Sit down, please, Mrs. Morrison. How can I help?" Janet explained her husband David was a delegate to the Trades Conference, elected by his workmates at Naismith and Gaskell's Bridgewater foundry in Patrickcroft. She'd been to see him, having been informed by a neighbour there were plans to arrest the strike leaders. Here she had met Irene Rose, who suggested she speak to Matthew. "What's the source of your friend's information?" "Elsie's daughter, Elizabeth. We lasses housemaid to Sir William Waugh. Evidently they had a great number of gentlemen at the house yesterday evening and were discussing the action they should take. They're plotting to arrest all the strike leaders who aren't Chartists, and my David's a Chartist." "Did they say when?" "Not precisely, but they were discussing the Chartist convention to take place Wednesday." Matthew nodded. Presumably the authorities would wait until the convention had made its decisions on the Thursday before making their move. "How old are your children, Mrs. Morrison?" This is Robert, he'll be 3 next May, and this is David, he'll be 5 next April. Matthew smiled at the youngsters and said hello. I think we should introduce these 2 boys to my friend Mary Upton. She's looking after 6 children here today, and I'm sure she'll be happy to welcome 2 more. Then, once they're settled in, we'll have a cup of tea together. After that, I suggest we 2 should go to see my daughter and your husband. You will be quite welcome to stay with us at our home over the next few days, if you wish. It might be far safer than your own home. The Glaswegian nodded assent. When it had been suggested she should seek out the mill owner, her mind had instinctively been full of doubts. A member of the class that had forced her and her husband to leave Scotland in search of employment seemed an unlikely ally. Yet he dealt with her in the most down-to-earth and matter-of-fact way. She had taken to him immediately, and felt sure she could trust him. That evening the mill owner, along with Michael O'Donnell, played host to David and Janet Morrison, James Leach and Albert Ashton. Irene Rose had disappeared upstairs to help Grace put young Daniel Ackroyd, Robert and David Morrison to bed. Matthew had learned that the conference had decided its immediate priorities and, once having elected a chairman and secretary, had gone on to elect a credentials committee and a resolutions committee. The chairman had invited Bernard McCartney, the Silk Weavers delegate, to make an address dealing with the historical background and events leading up to the strikes and outlining proposals for further action, following which a general discussion took place. After this, the delegates submitted proposals to the resolutions committee. This body had been asked to work through the evening to produce a main resolution for amendment, debate and adoption the next day. Right at the outset, 2 delegates objected to the demands of the Charter being linked to the strike, but many more argued it was important to continue to demand working men have the right to vote, pointing out their claims for improved working conditions and shorter hours could only be guaranteed if they were enshrined in law, and laws were unlikely to be enacted without first gaining parliamentary representation. The chairman pointed out there'd be plenty of time to debate the issue the next day, once they had concrete proposals in front of them. After bringing the mill owner up to date, the discussion around the dinner table moved on to the news Janet had gleaned. They debated the possibilities of arrests taking place, their timing, and how they should handle the situation, if and when they happened. David Morrison treated the whole situation in stoic fashion. If I have to go to prison and stand trial for my beliefs, I'll do so, and I'm sure Janet will stand by me. At the same time, he was of the view that the authorities wouldn't make a move until the end of the Chartist Convention, to which he was a delegate. Janet confirmed her support for her husband. However, she made it clear, understandably in the circumstances, she was worried about her children. James Leach, who wasn't a delegate to the Trades Conference, but was a delegate to the Chartist Convention, and expected to be a prime target if arrests were made, argued it was important the Trades Conference have an alternative leadership ready to take over the direction of the general strike, in case the worst should happen. He pointed out that after every surge of trade union and Chartist activity, the authorities had arrested the leaders, and this had all too often caused mayhem. 11 Chartists had been sentenced to transportation to Australia between 1839 and 1840, and many more had been incarcerated in British prisons. This was one of the reasons he and others had developed the National Charter Association as an organised body with local branches and an elected national leadership. In the event of the existing leadership being in prison, the branches could quickly replace them. He argued the Trades Conference should learn the lessons and have an alternative leadership in waiting. Michael O'Donnell agreed with him and promised to have a word with Hutchinson and Stewart in the morning. At this point Irene Rose rejoined them, a beaming smile on her face. "You have 2 lovely lads there, Janet." The Glaswegian smiled. "They're so well behaved," Irene Rose continued. "I thought they'd be unsettled being in a strange house for the first time, but they soon dropped off to sleep." Michael O'Donnell laughed. "Rose thinks all kids are wonderful. I've never met one she hasn't been able to charm. She'd make a wonderful mother." Irene Rose gazed at him for a moment as if weighing her words. "Do you really think so?" she asked. "What about you, Michael O'Donnell? Are you ready to be a father?" Matthew Wetherill looked across the table, detecting something in the tone of his daughter's question, and noticing Michael remain silent for what seemed like a rather long time. Eventually the trade union organiser nodded. "Yes, Rose, I really think I am. At least I will be, as soon as our present difficulties are over." "That's good news," Irene Rose replied quietly. She broke off, suddenly seeming conscious of her father's questioning frown. She smiled, turned, and caught her husband's eye once more. "It really is good news, Michael O'Donnell. The fact of the matter is, I have every reason to think I'm pregnant."